Welcome to Decode. Last video, we talked about human anxiety throughout history. But today, let's go through different time periods and see how humanity tried to explain mental illness. Because before psychology existed, people had some very strange theories. Imagine having anxiety in the Middle Ages, not, I forgot to reply to an email, anxiety. Real panic attacks, hearing voices, severe depression, mental breakdowns. And instead of a therapist, people bring in a priest holding holy water like, yeah, that dude definitely has demons. For most of human history, humanity had absolutely no idea how mental illness worked. And honestly, our first attempts at explaining it were extremely chaotic. Because when humans don't understand something, we tend to do one of three things: worship it, fear it, or burn it. Sometimes all three. Today we talk about depression, PTSD, anxiety disorders, schizophrenia, and trauma. But thousands of years ago, people thought invisible evil spirits were running around like psychological hackers, and somehow, that explanation survived for a very long time. Ancient humans. Bro, it's definitely a spirit. Thousands of years ago, human civilization was still trying to understand basic things, like weather, disease, why Steve from the village suddenly started screaming at trees. And because science barely existed, people explained strange behavior through mythology and religion, which honestly makes sense. If someone started hallucinating in 2000 BC, you weren't exactly going to say, ah yes, this appears to be a dopamine regulation issue. No, you'd say, the gods are angry. An evil spirit entered his body. Karen from the neighboring village probably cursed him. In ancient Mesopotamia, mental illness was often linked to supernatural forces. Ancient Egyptians believed spiritual imbalance could affect the mind. Meanwhile, the ancient Greeks tried to sound more scientific. They came up with the theory of the four humors. Basically, they believed your body contained four fluids, and if one became unbalanced, your brain would start acting weird. Imagine being diagnosed with depression because your sad juice levels were incorrect. Humanity really was freestyling psychology for a while. But to be fair, the Greeks were at least trying to look for physical explanations. That was a huge step compared to, Greg accidentally offended a ghost. And yet, despite all these theories, nobody truly understood the brain. Because the brain was basically the universe's most confusing meat computer. People knew it existed. They just had no idea why it occasionally decided to ruin someone's life. The Middle Ages, when everything became demonic. Then humanity entered the Middle Ages, which was unfortunately one of the least mentally healthy eras imaginable. Europe became deeply obsessed with religion, sin, demons, and punishment from God. So, naturally, mental illness became connected to evil forces. If someone had seizures, demons. Hallucinations, demons. Extreme paranoia, more demons. Insomnia combined with emotional instability, congratulations. Satan apparently rented an apartment in your nervous system. People genuinely believed this, not because they were stupid, but because fear fills the gaps where knowledge is missing. Humans are really uncomfortable with things they can't explain. Honestly, we still are. Modern humans just express it differently. Instead of accusing people of witchcraft, we start conspiracy podcasts. Progress. Many mentally ill people during this time were isolated, abused, or tortured. Some were even executed for supposedly practicing witchcraft. Imagine having schizophrenia in the 1400s. You're already terrified by voices in your head, and suddenly the entire town decides you are the problem. That's horrifying. But history repeatedly shows something uncomfortable about human nature. When society doesn't understand suffering, it often punishes it instead of helping it. And mental illness became one of history's biggest examples of that. The first asylums. This does not look like healthcare. Eventually, societies realize something important. Okay, maybe publicly burning mentally ill people is not ideal. Huge breakthrough for humanity. So people created institutions for the mentally ill. Sounds progressive, right? Well, not exactly. Early mental asylums were often terrible places. Some patients were chained to walls. Others were locked in tiny rooms for years. Many treatments were brutal, experimental, or outright horrifying. In some places, wealthy people would pay to visit asylums for entertainment. Human suffering became a tourist attraction. Imagine having the worst psychological breakdown of your life, while random rich dudes walk by like, "Fascinating behavior, Gerald." Humanity truly invented emotional reality TV centuries before television existed. The problem was simple. Society still didn't understand mental illness. People stopped calling patients possessed, but they still saw them as dangerous, broken, or less human, which meant fear was still driving the system, just with fewer crosses and more chains. This pattern still exists today. Humans love labeling people they don't understand, especially when those people behave differently from social norms. History changes clothes, but human psychology stays weirdly consistent. Science finally enters the chat. Then slowly, over centuries, science started making real progress. Doctors began studying the nervous system, brain injuries, trauma, and behavior. And humanity discovered something revolutionary. Mental illness was not caused by demons. It was connected to the brain itself. Huge plot twist for the exorcism industry. Researchers began identifying conditions like depression, anxiety disorders, PTSD, bipolar disorder, and schizophrenia. And for the first time, these conditions were approached as medical and psychological issues, not moral failures. That changed everything, because once society stops viewing suffering as evil, it finally becomes possible to treat people with compassion. Now, obviously, early psychiatry was far from perfect. Some historical treatments were questionable, and by questionable, I mean humanity occasionally looked at the brain and said, "What if electricity?" Which is never a comforting sentence. But despite mistakes, science slowly pushed humanity toward understanding rather than fear. And that shift may be one of the most important psychological changes in human history, because understanding reduces panic, knowledge weakens superstition, and empathy becomes possible once people stop believing suffering is a curse. Modern society, we're better, but still kind of bad at this. Modern society likes to believe we've evolved beyond all that. But honestly, we still struggle to understand mental health properly. People still say things like, "Just think positive, stop overreacting, you're just lazy." Everyone gets sad sometimes, which is basically the modern version of, "Have you tried not being possessed?" Mental illness is difficult because it's often invisible. You can see a broken arm. You can't always see emotional exhaustion, panic disorders, trauma, or severe depression, which means many people suffer quietly while appearing completely normal. And sometimes, the funniest person in the room is secretly fighting psychological warfare every single day. Modern life also created entirely new mental pressures. Humans evolved to survive small tribes, occasional danger, and maybe a tiger attack. Now our brains process social media, doom scrolling, economic stress, global crises, 24-hour news, online comparison, and notifications every 6 seconds. Your nervous system was designed for hunting berries, not reading emails labeled urgent team meeting. If ancient humans saw modern society, they'd probably think we were the possessed ones. Because imagine explaining burnout to a medieval farmer. Yes, I stare at glowing rectangles all day until my soul evaporates. And despite modern awareness, stigma still exists. Many people are afraid to ask for help, afraid of looking weak, afraid of being judged. Which is tragic, because mental illness is not weakness. It's part of being human. The brain is an organ, and like every organ, sometimes it struggles. For thousands of years, humanity called mental illness demonic possession, madness, witchcraft, or divine punishment. Today we use clinical terms instead, and that's progress. But maybe the biggest change wasn't scientific. Maybe it was emotional, because humanity slowly learned something important. People experiencing psychological pain are not monsters. They are human beings trying to survive their own minds. That realization took us way longer than it should have. So the next time you hear someone struggling mentally, remember this. A few hundred years ago, society might have feared them. 1,000 years ago, society might have punished them. But today, we finally have the chance to do something different. To understand instead of fear. To listen instead of judge. And maybe that's one of the rare moments in history where humanity actually leveled up. Subscribe to Styx Decode for more videos about psychology, dark behavior, and humanity slowly losing its mind throughout history, while pretending everything is completely fine.